All right, let's dive into something we all do but rarely think about. How we understand other minds.
Ah, yes, the age-old mystery.
Philosophers call this folk psychology, but we're going to explore it through something called mental simulation.
That's right. And our main source for today's deep dive is, well, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, specifically their entry on folk psychology as mental simulation.
Pretty heady stuff, but we'll break it down. It really gets you thinking about how we figure out what's going on in other people's heads.
Exactly. Is it like we've got this, like, secret decoder ring for human behavior, or is it more like we're experiencing it in some way?
I mean, we take this ability for granted every day.
We really do. This almost magical sense of knowing what others are thinking and feeling.
Right, but how does this mind reading actually work?
Well, that's where mental simulation comes in. The idea is that we understand others by basically recreating their mental states, in our own minds.
So instead of having some mental rule book, we're running these little simulations.
Exactly.
Okay, that's fascinating. But what exactly is a mental simulation?
Yeah, it's not as straightforward as just putting yourself in someone else's shoes.
Right, there must be more to it than that.
There's a lot of debate about what makes a mental simulation, well, a mental simulation.
So how do we even start to think about it?
One way is through the idea of resemblance. Like imagine reading a description of a sunset.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Even though you're not actually seeing the sunset, your brain's using the same visual pathways as if you were.
Oh, I get it. So the simulated experience of visualizing that sunset, it resembles the real experience, even if it's being created in a different way.
Precisely. It's like a mental echo.
Interesting.
And that brings us to another key point. Reuse. The idea here is we don't need a separate system for imagining or simulating. We simply repurpose what we already have. The same mechanisms we use for experiencing the world.
Wow, talk about efficiency.
Right. So instead of our brains building a whole new mental apparatus, we adapt the tools we have.
That's pretty amazing.
It is, and this concept of reuse is really important because it suggests that our simulations are, well, they're deeply tied to our own personal experiences.
Okay, so we're not just downloading someone else's thoughts and feelings, we're filtering them through our own unique lens.
Exactly.
But wouldn't that make our understanding of others very subjective?
That's one of the big questions, and it gets to the heart of the debate within simulation theory itself.
Okay, so there's disagreement even within the theory.
But before we get into that, let's focus on the nature of these simulated mental states. Like, what are they exactly?
Yeah, they're not quite the real thing, right?
No, not exactly. Think of them as pretend states.
Pretend states.
Like, imagine watching a scary movie.
Okay, been there.
You know it's not real, but you still feel fear,
Yes,
right?
definitely.
That's a pretend state. Your mind's simulating the emotion without the actual danger.
It's like my mind's running a what-if scenario, and even though I know it's not real, my body reacts as if it is.
Exactly. And this applies to more complex mental states, too, like decision-making.
Okay, give me an example.
Imagine your friend is deciding whether or not to go into a cafe.
Sounds familiar.
They want coffee, they believe the cafe sells coffee, and this leads to the decision to go in. Their decision-making mechanism is, well, online, engaged in its primary function.
Makes sense. But how does that relate to simulation?
Well, if I'm imagining making that decision, even if I don't actually want a coffee right now, my decision-making mechanism is, let's say, offline.
So it's not really making the decision.
No, it's being repurposed, you see, to simulate a decision, which gives me insight into my friend's thought process without me actually needing a coffee.
So it's a simulation of a decision, but not an actual decision.
Right, it's a quasi-decision.
Okay, that makes sense.
This helps us understand the real thing.
Wow, so we have all these different levels of mental states, real ones and simulated ones, and our minds are constantly shifting between them.
You got it. It really is like a mental juggling act.
But how much control do we have over all of this? Are we, choosing when to simulate? Or is it happening all the time without us knowing?
That's a great question, and it brings us to the distinction between different levels of simulation processes.
Different levels.
Yes, which we can explore in more detail later. So about that control you were asking about, it helps to think about simulation as happening on different levels.
Okay, so different levels of simulation, like what?
Well, we can distinguish between, let's say, high-level and low-level simulation processes.
Okay, high and low.
High-level simulations are more deliberate, like when you're imagining yourself having a tough conversation.
Oh, so really using your imagination to picture things in your head.
Exactly. Or like visualizing yourself winning an award, things like that.
Makes sense.
It's as if your mind is like a director crafting a whole movie just for you.
I like that analogy.
And there's more and more evidence suggesting that these high-level simulations, they're all driven by one cognitive mechanism:
Oh, really? Which one?
imagination.
Wow, so imagination is like the key to all of this.
It seems to be, but then we have these low-level simulations, which are way more automatic. They happen without us even realizing it.
Interesting. Like what?
Remember that mirrored disgust example we talked about? Just seeing someone else's disgusted expression can trigger a similar feeling in us?
Right. It's like our brains are wired to mirror what we see.
Exactly. But if we're not even aware of these low-level simulations, how can they help us understand other people?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, there are two main views on this, the constitution view and the causation view.
Two views. Okay.
The constitution view says that the simulation itself is the understanding, like mirroring someone's disgust that basically is understanding they're disgusted.
So no extra steps needed. The simulation is the understanding.
Right.
Interesting.
But then there's the causation view.
Which says what?
It says the simulation is just the first step. Like, it gives us raw data, but we still need to use concepts and judgments to make sense of it.
So mirroring disgust gives us a clue, but then we have to do some thinking about it.
You got it. We apply our concept of disgust and decide that, yes, that person is feeling disgust.
Okay, that makes sense. So one view says the simulation is enough, and the other says we need something more.
Exactly. And this gets at a really important question. How much of our understanding of others is automatic and how much involves conscious thinking?
Like, are we on autopilot or are we actively thinking about it?
Right. It makes you wonder how much of our social interaction is driven by these unconscious processes and how much is, well, deliberate and strategic.
That's a fascinating question. But it sounds like simulation theory itself has some challenges to overcome.
It does. It faces some pretty tough questions.
Oh, no. I was just starting to wrap my head around this whole simulation thing. What kind of challenges are we talking about?
Well, one of the big ones revolves around mirror neurons. When they were discovered, it was seen as huge support for simulation theory. But now there's debate about whether they're truly about simulation or if they have a completely different function.
So maybe we got a little ahead of ourselves thinking they were the answer to everything.
It's possible. And then there's the whole issue of individual differences. If we're using our own minds as models to understand others, how can we be sure our simulations are accurate?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we all have our own unique experiences. What if my simulation of your thought process is totally wrong because our brains just work differently?
Exactly. That's what's called the self-other problem, and it's a big one. If we're so different, how can simulation be a reliable way to understand others?
Good point. It's like trying to use a map of Paris to navigate London. Might get you somewhere, but probably not where you want to go.
Exactly. And then there's the question of babies. They seem to understand some things about other minds really early on.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing how much baby pick up on.
Right. So does this support simulation theory, or does it suggest there's some other mechanism going on?
So simulation might be part of the answer, but maybe not the whole story.
It's possible, and these are just a few of the challenges that researchers are still working through.
Well, it sounds like we've got this fascinating theory with a lot of intriguing evidence, but also some big questions still hanging over it. Yeah, it really does feel like we're only just getting started here.
We are, in many ways.
But even with all these complexities and challenges, it's just incredible to me that simulation theory even attempts to explain something as profound as how we understand each other.
Absolutely. It's really getting at the core of what makes us social beings. This idea that we use our own mental experiences to try and understand the thoughts and feelings and intentions of others.
It's like we have this built-in empathy machine that's constantly running these simulations, trying to bridge the gap between minds.
That's a great way to put it. And it reminds me of something the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry brings up, this tension between simulation theory and its biggest rival.
Oh, right. We can't forget about the other side of the coin. What was it called?
Theory theory.
Theory, yeah. What's the deal with that one?
Well, unlike simulation theory, which is all about the process of simulation, theory theory says we rely on this internal folk psychology.
So instead of running simulations, we're consulting some mental rule book.
In a way, yes. It's like having a set of rules about how minds work.
So if someone's frowning and has their arms crossed, they must be angry. That kind of thing.
That's a very simplified example. But yeah, you get the idea. Theory theory says we understand actions by applying these rules that linked mental states to behaviors.
Okay, I see. But wouldn't it be similar to just imagine myself feeling angry and then, predict that I might frown or cross my arms? Why even bother with a whole set of rules?
Well, that's exactly what simulation theory argues. It's all about simplicity and efficiency. Why create a whole complex theory when you can just use what you already have?
Right. Work smarter, not harder.
Precisely. But some critics argue that even when we simulate, we're still using some kind of implicit theory about how minds work.
Okay. So even if I'm imagining myself being angry, my simulation is still shaped by my understanding of what anger is and how it might make me act.
Exactly. And this leads to a pretty mind-boggling question. Are simulation theory and theory theory really that different, or are they just two sides of the same coin?
Whoa, it's like a philosophical riddle. But I guess the point is, both theories are trying to explain this incredible ability we have to connect with other minds.
They are, and there's a growing understanding that maybe neither one fully captures the whole picture.
You mean like maybe we need both?
Possibly. Maybe we need a hybrid model that combines aspects of both simulation and theory.
I like that. A model that takes into account both the intuitive, experiential part of simulation and also the way that theoretical frameworks can help us organize our understanding.
Precisely. And that's where a lot of the current research is headed, trying to understand how these approaches work together, what's happening in the brain when we try to understand each other.
Yeah, like the neural and cognitive basis of it all.
Exactly. It's all about shedding light on this incredible thing that makes us human, our ability to connect with the minds of other people.
And on that note, that's our deep dive for today. But, the exploration doesn't have to end here.
That's right.
Think about your own experiences. How much of how you understand others feels intuitive, like it just happens? And how much feels like you're actively thinking about it?
It's a fascinating thing to consider.
Maybe you'll discover your own unique blend of simulation and theory at work.